Welcome to Keep Hustling, where we are going past the why to get to the how. I'm your host, the always hustling Aaron Gordon, aka NY Risk Advisor, aka Mr. Keep Hustling. In this podcast, we will be diving deep into the professional and personal successes of our guests to find out how they hustled through the most difficult times in their life and their development to achieve the success they've gotten to today. So buckle up for what hopes to be an amazing ride. And of course, now and always, keep hustling. With my guest, Kristin Scanlon. Kristin, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to it.
This is awesome. And the reason why I'm pumped about this is there's a lot to talk about in your hustle. I'm a huge fan of your content. Mario introduced us. We're part of that jazz, which I'm very proud of and love the network there. But not only are you from Queens, so New York, not the real New York, because I'm from the real New York, but it's close enough. It's the closest that we're willing to get without having to say Brooklyn or Bronx. So like, we'll take it.
Yeah.
And it's not Staten Island, so like whatever. We're not even going there. But really, thank you so much for being here. I want to jump right in. Your story is one of a lot of evolution, and I think that gets lost a lot in the hustle. Is that people get stuck in one thing, and they don't realize that part of their hustle is evolving and growing. And obviously, you have to stay on a certain path, but nothing is set in stone other than, a person's ability to hustle. So I want to ask, where does that come from? Where does your ability to pivot, hustle, drive, keep that going really stem from?
So it's funny because for a while I was like, is there something wrong with me? Right? Because I would get good at something. I'm like, okay, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And what's next? And I feel like life is about evolving and evolution, but really in my core, where I've had this desire to learn, grow, and do whatever it takes was my dad was one of 12 children growing up. So I grew up literally listening to him saying the first one up was the best one dressed and the best one fed. And I watched my dad work really, really hard from, where he was growing up to be able to what he was able to provide for my sisters and I. And I'm teary eyed because I'm grateful. And his work ethic, still to this day, almost 69 years old, the man does not sit or stop. He's always learning how to make a quick buck. Oh, I'll do a clean out for you. Oh, I'll do this. I'll do that. So it's watching what he's done and what he's built has just made me be who I am today, because for me, it's always in giving that I shall receive. So I always find ways of, okay, here's where I am now. How do I get here? Once I'm here, what can I give back to where I was, and what can I give back to get me even further forward? So, I've always watched him give to others selfishly, like people are so selfish in this world. He's the most selfless man, and it really instilled that strong work ethic in me at such a young age. I mean, I got my first job at 14 years old.
What was that?
I worked at a foot doctor's office. One of my neighbors, she was a foot doctor, and she was like, oh, I need help filing this. I was like, I'll work for you. I could walk right up the block. It was literally 10 block walk. My parents didn't have to drive me. They really didn't want me working that young, but it was a choice that I really always wanted to learn how to be good with money, independent with money, financially stable and strong.
My first job was at Cold Stone, so I got it down the block from my parents' house. Don't ask me to sing. We're not going to do that.
Hey guys, we just got it too.
That's right. Oh, all right. Whatever. Whatever. My wife and kids now are going to hate this episode or love this episode, but it's fine. I have found, and people who listen to this podcast are going to tell me that I'm a broken record, but I'm okay with it, that I believe the greatest impact that parents have on their children is the impact that the children don't realize at the time.
Yeah.
And listening to you, and I am blessed. I was blessed to work with my father for the first 14 years of my career. We just, unfortunately lost him just over a year ago, and I'm still blessed to work with my mother every day. And I think that the things that my siblings and I learned are the things that were ingrained in us, that when you look back as you and I get older, you realize that it was that work ethic that was instilled in you. And yet so many people focus on My father sat down with me and told me that this is how you balance a checkbook. Not that that's not important, or this is what you do in this situation. But it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the day-to-day. And unfortunately, the people that don't have that are not blessed like you and I to have those influences. So I think that's great. You said your sisters. Do you have no brothers?
I'm one of three girls. I'm the oldest of three girls. Yeah.
And 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 you're still inspired by your father. I love that. I love everything about that. I have four daughters, so I love that.
Yeah, no, I'm inspired because, I mean, he didn't have any sons. Like, people joke that, like, I was probably the most tomboyish of us all growing up, right? Like, I played sports. I was like one of the only girls on my block growing up. But, you know, my dad always taught us, like, how to fix things, how to do things. And I think, the most important thing he really left with us, like, and like always instills in us is everything's figure outable. And then I joke, if my dad can't figure out, it can't be done, because we call him MacGyver. But I've always had that inquisitive, solution based, like, let me try to figure this out. And if I can't figure it out, I'll find someone else who can figure it out, right? And that's like the beauty of being part of the Collab Project and all these other communities, is if you can't figure out, there's always someone else that can, or someone else that's willing to educate you on how you could do it too. And I try
And
to be that person of connecting people as well.
and that is the hustle. The ultimate hustle is saying there's nothing that I can't accomplish with by myself, growing into it, learning about it from someone else now so I can do it the next time. Or maybe it's a skill, right? No, you maybe you will, but I'm not going to be a doctor anytime soon. So that's a skill I know I won't master, but knowing the people that you can go to that will help you in those scenarios, I think is really what this whole project is about. It's about empowering people to realize that they can accomplish anything that they want
Mhm.
just by ch- chasing and following that dream and chasing and following that drive.
And it's true because, I mean, I'll be honest. Listen, as much as my dad's been an example, sometimes they still have that old school fear mindset, right? So getting the secure job with the benefits, the stable pay, the paycheck, you know, right out of college, I studied accounting, and I went from college. I worked for a big company. It was a mid-sized accounting firm. And then from there, I went to Con Ed, which was a very stable, secure job, very solid
You
job.
work for Con Ed?
For almost 10 years, 9.5 years, I was at Con Ed.
We have a lot to talk about.
Yeah. And I was at the stable, secure job. And, 9 years ago, I got my real estate license. And it was around this time, 9 years ago. And I was still at Con Ed, and I was afraid to leave because it was six-figure salary, benefits. You have 401k. It wasn't a pension, but there was like an annuity type benefit and all these other perks, discounts, the whole nine. So when I was getting my license going into sales, it was always like, I'm just going to do this as to have it, to educate myself, because really how I got into real estate was my dad owned properties and he would always ask me questions. And I had more of like the financial smart, having an accounting degree, and I wanted to understand things. So I kind of did it really to understand what he was doing, just in case they ever needed my help. And I really never intended this being a career for myself, because, I was taught, you go to school, you go to college, you get a good job, you get good pay, you get good benefits, and you'll make it in life. You'll do good. But deep within my soul, like, I knew that wasn't my purpose. And deep within my soul, I knew that eventually I had to color outside the lines, and that wasn't going to be my plan. But for a while, I was very scared to cut that cord and take that leap of faith. And I got my license as a part-time agent. I might have done one rental, but then as a part-time agent in my second year, I did about like 8 deals, and I made close to 100 grand, like, as a part-time agent. I was like, well, if I could do this part-time, what would life look like full-time? Because I had that. I left my corporate job. I was out showing houses nights, weekends. Like, I was working 7 days, like, because I have that. If I want to do something, you're not going to stop me and you're not going to take it away. I'm going to figure it out. And for a while, it was really, really hard. Like, I was always an overachiever, and I don't know if it's just being an oldest child of always trying to like prove something to your parents, or prove, yeah, like, I feel like as you get older, you start like looking back and like, why am I this way? Why am I that way? Like, who am I being, trying to prove myself, for being this overachiever? And I was afraid to leave my job because I was like, well, what if I fail? Like, what if I don't make enough money? What if I can't pay my bills? What if I can't pay health insurance? Like, I think the biggest thing was health insurance, because I remember as a family of five growing up, my dad was self-employed. He had a car business, and my mom eventually went and got a job that paid our family's health benefits, because it was like over $10,000 at the time for a family of 5 to have health insurance. And it seemed like a lot of money. But then when I started doing the math and figuring things out, I was like, maybe this is doable and I could kind of do this on my own. And as the overachiever, the last year I was at Con Ed, I've always had exceeds expectations on all my performance reviews. And I was at a place in my life where there was so much changing and so much I needed to let go of. And all of a sudden, I got a needs improvement on my performance review. I was so taken back by it. So, like, this is not acceptable. Like, I worked in HR at one point before this position I was in. And I was like, I don't deserve this. And, like, I was like, I need to rebuttal this. Like, I know my worth. I know who I am. Like, I know the value I add. But I know, like, sometimes politics plays into performance reviews, and, people's friends work for each other. And sometimes, even though you are a shining star, your light gets dulled so someone else could get shined down on. And instead of dragging it out and rebuttaling it, I took time off. I came back and I was like, I don't know what my plan is, but I ain't staying here. And I literally was like, I walked up to my boss. I was like, listen, I need to talk to you. He's like, I was like, no, it's going to take 5 minutes of your time. I'm resigning. My last day is going to be Wednesday. I'm going to exhaust my vacation time. I have a folder of all the notes of things I was working on. I prepped it. I planned it, because any job I ever had, I was always able to like go back to, because I always left breadcrumb trail of how to do everything, because that's who I am. I'm a planner. I want others, like if I went on vacation, I want people to know how to do my job and do it well. Like I don't want to left any page unturned. And they were all shocked. Like everyone was shocked, because at the time I was in supply chain, like negotiating almost $1 billion in guest main construction contracts, right? That was a big project at Con Ed at that time. And I was like one of the people on the supply chain side negotiating out these bids. And I left so quickly, so abruptly, because one, my ego was hurt, right? It needs improvement. But two, this was almost like the universe saying, it's time to let go. You weren't going to do it unless we pushed you out. And we had to give you that negative news for you to make a choice to set yourself free. And it's funny because everyone that reaches out to me now says you were like this locked up cage, like bird in a cage. And now like you're like this beautiful bird or butterfly, like flying through, following your dreams, following your passions, and really just doing what makes you happy. And don't get me wrong, the hustle is hard. Sometimes it's a lot harder than working the 9 to 5 I had at Con Ed, and I'm putting in a lot more hours at days and times, but it's beyond rewarding and fulfilling because I get to choose my schedule. I get to choose what Kristin wants to do each and every single day.
So there is so much to unpack there. But usually my next question, and thank you really for sharing and opening up. But usually my next question is take us to the most pivotal moment in your career. But I actually want to not ask that. And I want to press on something that you mentioned. And that is first, well, a two-part question. First and foremost, when you look back at that needs improvement, obviously, and you mentioned it, it turned out to be a pivotal moment. And in that moment, you said you were upset. Now, do you believe that they were right? Meaning that there was something that you had changed because you were feeling burnt out or that this wasn't your calling that led you to subconsciously perform less? That's option number one. Or option number two is you actually were still knocking it out of the park. And literally the universe said, we gotta get Kristin out of here. And the only way to do it is to give her this thing that she doesn't even deserve, this needs improvement. But that needs improvement will then stimulate her to say, I'm out of here.
Well, I think there's multiple parts to that question, right? So one, I was not really happy with what I was doing and truly loving what I was doing. And, when you're not happy, I think that shows. Two, I was also not really happy in my personal life. Like I had a lot of things going on. I was in a bad relationship, so there was like a lot of factors that, you never know what someone's going through on the day to day. And when people show up at work, sometimes they are showing up at work as their best selves and doing the best that they can, checking off the boxes just to get through a day in their life. And then number three, I always felt I was putting all in to the point that they even created a new position for me within that department because of I've always had a voice, I always had a vision, I always had ideas. But the thing is when you work for such big companies, sometimes there's always politics and hurdles in order to get some of these ideas approved. So I was always like a thought leader and like finding ways to get employee engagement up, get this up, get that up, but you weren't always able to implement those ideas because of politics, restrictions, policies, procedures. So I think it's like three things. I was unhappy. I wasn't in a great place in my personal life. Yes. Was I showing up to work the best I could? Yes. I mean, I know a lot of the contractors were disappointed and upset to see me leave because they always said I was like one of the best people. Like I communicated, I got the stuff done, I showed up to work. Although I was little, I was fierce, right? Like you're negotiating with a lot of men and a lot of contractors. I was a female in that role. It's not a traditional role for a female to be negotiating construction contracts, but I was a no BS type of person. What you see is what you get. So I wouldn't let anyone push back on me. I would always push back on them or, stand my ground, which, because that's a role where a lot of people could get themselves in trouble with kickbacks and different things. But I always followed the rules, stood in my truth, stood my ground, and pushed back when I had to. So, could it have gone either way? Yeah, but I'm not there anymore. So time to move forward.
Do you ever regret it? Do you ever regret taking the leap?
No, I mean, there's times I'm like, all right, well, what would life look like if I had a 40-hour work week? Not going to lie. There are times when I sit back and say, okay, let me press pause. I feel like I'm on a hamster wheel. What would life look like if I just went to work and went home and I didn't have anything to do like at the ninth hour? Like, last night I was working till 8:30, 9 o'clock, getting stuff done because I had a full day today.
Also,
Hustle. But then also, right, I just got back from a month trip in Bali where I booked a one-way ticket. And if I did that at a corporate job, I would have had to take a leave of absence, but I left and took a one-way ticket and my business still ran, and I came back to even more business than I left with. So there's pros and there's cons of both, and I think it depends on your personality type. It depends on who you are as a person. What are your personal business expenses? What's the life that you want to design and create for yourself? And that's something that I am creating, is a life by design and a life that I'm choosing to live and trying to empower other realtors, business owners, for them to say, listen, if I could do it, you could do it too. And that's where like coaching's coming in to play in my life, because you have to lead by example. If you're doing it and other people see you're doing it, they know it can be done too.
I have to ask you about the trip to Bali and a couple of things. First and foremost, being a business owner, running a team, and taking that leap. And yes, everybody in the world can say I have a great team. I knew that they would perform. I knew it would be okay. I knew I would come back to business. That's all well and good. And a lot of people can say that. At the end of the day, to book a one-way ticket is something that nope, I don't want to say not a lot of people, nobody does. And yet you did. And I would like to, why? What was driving you to take that trip?
So Bali's been on my list for years, right? Like probably 10, 11 years ago, I was homesick. I watched Eat, Pray, Love, and I was like, I want to do this. I'm single. I could go on all these fun trips and find myself, right? So back then I did book Italy solo and I went on a group trip in Italy. But Bali's always been something on my list. I love yoga. I love spirituality. I love to travel. I love to like meet people I've never met, go to places I've never been, learn about cultures and just different things. And, booking a one-way ticket or driving across the states or, moving across the country was always something that I had a fear in me to do, right? Because as much as parents are loving and kind and all these things, my parents don't like to travel like very far. My parents, I was always very close to my family. So the idea of to take a leap of faith and do that and not have my family close to me was always like scary and what if, right? And I would always say, well, what if this happened? They're not going to come. Or, my mom would be like, well, if that happens, I'm not getting on a plane to come get you. So that was always in the back of my head. And I was like, well, if I left my corporate job and I didn't have the parachute open and it opened for me, like, what else can I do? And, there's been a couple of other pivotal things that have happened to me in the course of my career in the last 2 to 3 years. So I did have a team. I still operate and am the founder of the Scanlon Home team. Right now, it's just been me. So I booked this one-way ticket what just me being on this team. So it was a risk that I could lose business. It was a risk that life could happen because, probably almost 2 years ago, me and my sister were a team and we split, and it was a hard thing for me because there was nothing more than I loved was to share this with my sister. And I went through a really rough year. And this year, well, June will be 1 year my friend died on a plane crash suddenly. Losing her made me realize how short life is and could be. And we only have right now to live our dreams and make them become a reality. So I said, you know what, Kristin? Leaving your corporate job, you didn't have a plan and you figured it out, booked the ticket. And shortly after, one of my friends posted she was doing a retreat in Bali. So I was like, well, this is a perfect opportunity for me to go. So I booked the retreat. I went with a bunch of girls. We went to Singapore, Bali, explored, went on the retreat, and then I stayed. All the other girls went home, and everyone was messaging me, so when are you going to come back? When are you going to come back? I'm like, I don't know, when I feel like it. And I was fortunate enough. I have some really great friends in the business. So even though I don't have a team, my business ran seamlessly. And I'm a coach for 18 realtors in my office and then 2 realtors outside of Keller Williams. And my friend Gina just stepped up to the plate. Of course, I had a huge document of all my deals going, all the information. She had access to it. She signed some of my coaching clients to it. And even though I don't have a team, it was like I had a team, and business actually became better because I surrendered and I let go. And I feel like what happens in life most and where people get stuck the most in making these decisions is fear. Fear of, well, if I go, what if I lose the deal? If I go, what if this happens, right? If I go, what if my business falls apart? One thing I learned in life is when things fall apart, better things are going to be coming together. When you get rejected, you're really being redirected, right? Through every breakthrough, on the other side of it is going to become a breakthrough. And taking this time off for myself has just made me get clearer and clearer and clearer. The more I was chasing my life, I was pushing it further and further away. Now I'm learning to choose my life, which is where I'm kind of going into of building a brand on coaching, helping people stop chasing their life, start choosing their life, create a life by design. We're all my goal is to be able to work really hard for a month, work okay for a month, and then take the next month off. What would life look like if I could take off a month a quarter?
First of all, thank you for sharing your so open and honest. People joke that my goal is to get people to cry quickly. It's not really. I just think that when people engage and embrace the hustle, they realize a lot of some things they do intentionally or unintentionally.
Yeah.
And I think that it is incredible that you took the time to actually intentionally recharge. I'm not going to say insane because I don't want to sound like your parents to go to Bali on a one-way ticket. Booking a return 5 weeks later or 4 weeks later would have been okay too, but whatever. But I got it. I'm with you. And I think there's some great posts on and we're going to obviously tag all your social media stuff in the show notes. I was following along through the Collab Project, through others, and I was like, well, I actually reached out to you right before, and I said, hey, maybe, I'd love for you to come on the podcast. And well, actually, I booked a one-way ticket to Bali, and I'm thinking, this woman's never coming back. This woman's totally nuts. She's gone. She's off the reservation. The next time I'm going to see Kristin, she's going to be running a retreat in Bali, living in a hut somewhere, which may happen one day, by the way.
So yeah, that would be I think eventually stuff like that will happen. Coming back was a choice that I made for multiple reasons. But going, I literally set things in place. I had power of attorneys. I had things set up. I was like, I'm having my I's dotted, my T's crossed, because if I need to make decisions, but I knew there were certain things I needed to finish here before I make other moves and decisions.
No, 100%. I'm just saying that I think that so many people wouldn't even forget about the one. I actually think, and this I think is a great way to close the circle on the hustle, that it's easier for the people who say, I have no plan. I'm just going to pack it up and just go, whose life is such chaos that they are not intentional about it. That's easier because a person's used to living in chaos. But a person like you who's intentional, who thinks about it, who then makes that intentional move or that intentional trip or that intentional time out and break in the hustle is harder. It's easy to, I didn't do it, but I think it is easy to be a 22-year-old single person who's never had a job, who puts their stuff in a backpack and says, I'll see you in 2 months. Like, what's the
Listen,
downside risk?
I
But you
mean,
had a lot of risk is my point. So
yeah,
I think that there's something there.
I had a lot to lose and a lot of risk. You know, I turned 41 in February. I was there for my 40 wonderful birthday. But, you know, there's some things you look back and like shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? I could have studied abroad in college, no risk, no worry, not a worry in the world. You know, your parents will most likely help you and help you figure it out. But here it's like, I'm doing this as an adult. I have bills. I own a place. Like, I have a business. But in hindsight, right, what I've learned in all of this, when you set intentions and you live with a purpose, the universe somehow allows things to happen and paves the way. And I know not everyone's spiritual, but like, example, I was like, my business was so busy before I was leaving just to even prep. Like, a couple of the girls were like, hey, you want to do this before? Hey, you want to book the hotel? Hey, you want to book? I couldn't even think what I wanted to do when I got there. I was just like, okay, retreat, I don't have to think. Flight, I'll figure it out. Let the girls book it and I'm really grateful the universe brought this sisterhood into my life where a lot of the girls did a lot of the planning, the researching, and got the information and it got done. And then after the retreat, it was so go, go, go those 2 weeks. It was so nice to not have to rush home and be able to just sit, relax, and do. If I wanted to lay on the lounge chair, I laid on the lounge chair. If I wanted to go for a run, I went for a run. If I wanted to go to an excursion, I went to an excursion. Like, and dance to my own beat, because I've always danced to my own beat of my own drum throughout my entire life. And I never realized it until I paused and slowed down. Like, wow, I've colored out a line so many times. I've made people question me so many times. So many people have told me I'm too loud, I'm too much, I'm too all over the place. But yet, so many people are attracted to me because of who I am and who I'm being. Right. And you're not going to be everyone's cup of tea, because sometimes you drink champagne and sometimes you're going to be a cup of coffee. And it's okay. Life is going to shed the layers of the people who are not meant to be in your life in that moment, and people, they're going to bring in those people when they're meant to be. And you know, this week was a prime example of it. I literally was like, you know what, my personal trainer doesn't have enough time for me. He only has 1 day a week. Like, universe, I need to find someone that's going to be consistent, that's going to have the times that works for Kristin's schedule, works for Kristin's life. And literally, my friend sent me a message. It was like, hey, this guy's having a flash sale. He's one of the best trainers in Lifetime in Garden City, and he's training in Manhasset. I'm like, oh shit, that's like down the block from my office. And he has the times that work for me, and the price is a better price. Like, it just fell in my lap. So it's like, when you
The
plant the seeds, stuff will follow.
that is what this podcast and this lifestyle and this message that we're trying to cultivate here at Keep Hustling is all about, is that your hustle is not my hustle. My hustle is not your hustle and the next person. And the only person that can determine your hustle is you, when you look in the mirror and when you keep hustling. All you have to do is keep hustling towards
Yeah.
your hustle, towards your goals, and you'll get there. Kristin, I've never said this to any of our guests before, but I can't wait to read your book. You haven't wrote the book yet? I'm saying right now, I
Keep
can't wait to read your book.
manifesting it for me.
I'm manifesting it. We've had guests on the podcast. We've been blessed with guests on the podcast who have written books. I've never said to anyone, I can't wait to read your book, just for the sayings, the insight, and all that, and inspired my hustle. So really, thank you. We have a closing tradition on the podcast where we ask our guests to leave us with their favorite all-time or current inspirational and motivational quote and what it means to them. So I am going to turn the floor over to you. Say thank you again for sharing so openly and honestly and vulnerably with us and with our audience. I know that, take myself out of it, that there will be people out there that will gain so much from it. So really, really thank you, and the floor is yours.
So, something that I like to say is, stop chasing your life, start choosing your life. You have the power to design your own life and the life you always dreamed of. Go get it.
That's it. Go get it and keep hustling. As we end every single episode of this podcast that we are so blessed to have amazing guests like Kristin on, do well by doing good, and remember and always keep hustling.
All right, hustlers, that brings us to the end of another fantastic episode. Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. If you have any suggestions, comments, or even just want to say hello, please feel free to reach out to us on all social media platforms. We are Keep Hustling Pod. Until next time, stay curious, stay hungry, and keep hustling.